Thank you.
Great. So Dr. Lucy Fromlova is an independent researcher who has worked at the interface between academia, social movements, and policy. Her close-up, transdisciplinary, innovative research focuses on ethnic, racial, sexual, and gender identities, particularly in relation to the lived experiences of queer Roma. And her book, Queer Roma, has recently come out, and we've spent some time with that this morning. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Lucy. So over to you, Lucy.
Thank you very much, everyone. And it's a great honor to have been invited onto today's event. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. I've prepared a presentation. So just a second. Can everyone see it all right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna give some sort of background first to the book, but more importantly than the book, I want to talk about the lived experiences of LGBTIQ Roma. And I suspect that Mihaela has covered some of these issues probably in the course of yesterday. But I just want to remind our participants that when we speak of Roma, we are really talking about a very diverse, heterogeneous, transnational ethnic minority. In fact, the largest ethnic minority in Europe, who originated in northern India and migrated between the 3rd and the 9th or the 10th centuries. And we're really talking about between 10 to 12 million people of Roma heritage in the EU alone. So I think it's really important to remember this level of heterogeneity when we speak about Roma. There are different subgroups. Again, something really, really important to bear in mind, in terms of the massive diversity, which unfortunately gets homogenized most of the time. So, you may be aware that roughly a month ago, Jimmy Carr, the very infamous, not famous, infamous stand-up comedian, made a joke about the Roma Holocaust. And it's something that we see in the public domain, quite frequently. Jokes, stereotypes, negative misrepresentations of Roma. So something that I will come back to as we go along. But it's really important to kind of bear in mind that even though, as I said, Roma are a diverse, heterogeneous, transnational ethnic minority, there are some common historic experiences of oppression, marginalization, persecution, and at times annihilation. So, and it's not just that, it's also a shared culture, including language. So there are many synergies. I also want to define queer in the sense, or in the kind of meaning that is not only to do with identity or the identities, the sexual and gender identities of people who identify as such, as lesbian, gay, bi, trans, intersex, and so on, but also to define it as a concept, as a sort of part of a big sort of body of literature. And I think it's really important to remember that queer, for instance, in Halperin's mind, is an identity without an essence, a positionality vis-a-vis the normative. I will come back to this later in the presentation. I just want to emphasize that the key trait or function of queer is this sort of notion of non or counter normativity, whether it's white normativity, heteronormativity, anything that becomes the social norm or normativity, and that in turn creates categories of people, and some are hierarchically lower, some are higher, some are hierarchically lower. So something we need to bear in mind. I want to also say that even though the issue of LGBTIQ Roma or queer Roma may seem niche to some people, it's actually something that has been talked about by LGBTIQ Roma and allies for quite some time. So I have sort of selected certain key moments and key names in the production of knowledge on queer Roma, whether it's in the arts industry, in the arts sector, whether it's in the academic sector. We have seen books, we have seen plays such as Roma Army, written by, it's a play written by the Selimovic sisters. I'm sure that it may have been mentioned yesterday by Mihaela. And then other people, for instance, Laszlo Farkas, I'm going to show the video later, who is a Hungarian gay Roma media sort of guru, producer, activist and artist, and many more. And also importantly, because we are also talking about the sort of interface between scholarship and activism, I want to emphasize that the emergence of the movement has actually seen this sort of going hand in hand between activism and scholarship or academia. So some key events accompanied the emergence of the LGBTIQ Roma movement. One important event was at the CEU, and it was also to do with this very important slogan, "Nothing without us, about us without us," which I believe took place sometime around 2010. And I can be corrected on that if it's wrong, but that's I believe the date. But previously, for instance, the LGBT UK-based LGBT Gypsy Romani scholar Daniel Baker published a paper about the gay gypsy, that's the name, which was republished in 2015 by the European Roma Rights Center publication, Nothing About Us Without Us, accompanied by many more publications and articles in that volume. And I've also listed some other conferences since that time. And I just want to underline that currently at the moment, there's a big transnational conference on LGBTIQ Roma. It's called Pathways to Visibility LGBTQI Roma in Europe, which is happening in a hybrid format at the moment in Prague and also online. And it's brought together people from across Europe, also beyond Europe, and it's presenting the findings of a transnational project called Roma LGBTIQ Go Visible. So I think you can see where I'm going with this, that there has been this almost like organic link between scholarship and activism when it comes to LGBTIQ Roma. And importantly, that's also a very important, very significant trait and dimension of my research and my work, which I'm going to get to in a moment. So the book and the lived experiences of LGBTIQ Roma that I'm going to talk about and that you've read about during your reading group is actually the result of knowledge co-production. And I really want to thank everyone who has participated who has contributed their lived experiences, because without those contributions, there would be no knowledge. And perhaps I can also get to this point, which is very much related to ethics and how collaborative research is done, as I speak with Angela later on. I've prepared, this sort of print screen of the book for people who may not have seen it, so that there is at least some idea as to how the book is structured. In your reading group, I asked you to look at chapters 3 and 4, which are 2 of the 3 main chapters that present new data. The 2 first chapters are basically more theoretical, and I thought it's something that we can also discuss as I speak with Angela, as we speak with each other in our discussion later on, the kind of framing and understanding of Romani identities and using different concepts to do that. So going back to my long-standing research interest, I have been involved in the Roma rights movement for the past 2 decades. The sort of question, the research question that drove my doctoral research, and I want to emphasize that the book is the result of my doctoral research, and basically transforming my thesis into a book form. That piece of research was motivated by the research question, what are the lived experiences of LGBTIQ Roma in and beyond Europe? In the book and in the chapters that you have read, you will have seen that the experiences are regionally diverse. So different people from different parts of Europe and also beyond Europe talk about what it's like to be LGBTIQ Roma. And in chapter 3, you will have read that sometimes the main force, the main oppression that eclipses other experiences is anti-Gypsyism, or sometimes also referred to as Romaphobia, a specific form of racism targeting Roma. So sometimes those experiences are actually much stronger, or so strong that they eclipse queer Roma's other experiences of other oppressions, be they, LGBTIQ phobic, sexist, Islamophobic, or other experiences of oppression. Chapter 3 also talks about the really important role of social units, fundamental social units such as family, kinship, and community in the enactment of what we may refer to as non-normative sexual and gender identities. And the book does talk about stories of rejection by Romani families and communities, and non-Romani communities. I want to emphasize that that's usually the main narrative that we hear or read about in the media, in mainstream media. But very importantly, this book brings unfamiliar, groundbreaking stories of acceptance by Romani families and communities. Because from what I can tell, based on my research, based on having spoken to many LGBTIQ Roma, LGBTIQ Roma or queer Roma have existed since time immemorial, and they have always been part of Romani families and communities, and have always been in all walks of life. Also, some other concepts pop up or they do not pop up, they are discussed in the book, specifically in relation to visibility, commonality, ordinariness, and strategic sameness. You will have also read about queer Roma's experiences of the closet, whether it's the ethnic or racial closet, the sexual or gender closet, and also the intersectional closet, plus passing as either non-Roma non-LGBT straight. I did not ask you to read chapter 5 because that would have been probably too much, but in that chapter I also talk about queer belonging, and hopefully this is something that we can discuss later as well. So one of the kind of key takeaways of the book is that the lived experiences and visual self-representations of LGBTIQ Roma pose a fundamental challenge to stereotypical, one-dimensional, negative, homogenizing misrepresentations of Roma as homophobic, anachronistic, and antithetical to European and Western modernity. That's unfortunately how Roma are often misrepresented, and not just in mainstream media, but in academia at times. I've just, before coming onto the conference, I watched a panel as part of the Pathways to Visibility conference that I mentioned several moments ago. And I was quite shocked that as part of one panel on the experiences of trans Roma, there was a Czech non-Romani gay researcher making some very harmful generalizations about Roma being gay or lesbian Roma being pushed into being trans. And I just want to emphasize that unfortunately, these kinds of harmful statements sometimes do come from within academia or within the non-Roma LGBTIQ community. So it's something that we do need to be sensitive to, something that we, and including myself, I feel compelled to challenge if I have an opportunity. I'm gonna skip some of this, but what I'm gonna discuss, and I think Angela and I will touch upon it later as well, is this sort of notion of the conceptualization of Romani identities, which has been dominant, and that's usually framed by the lens of ethnicity, and within the kind of conventional Roma rights movement, there's also been this very narrow heteronormative male-dominated reading of Romani ethnicity. So it seems like this kind of normative reading of authentic Romani ethnicity has this kind of component of heteronormativity in it as well. But one of the messages of the book is that the lived experiences of queer Roma challenge that. And we see this kind of identity dilemma that is really important to talk about. As early as 1995, Joshua Gempson talked about a queer dilemma. And that means this sort of mobilizing around fixed identity categories, or what you might also know as strategic essentialism. So when the rights of a group, a minority group, are being oppressed, when people are being disenfranchised, that group starts mobilizing around a fixed identity category, whether it's LGBT or Roma. And then in turn, this kind of fixed reading of that identity becomes a source of oppression. So I think it's really helpful to also think of these processes in identity movements and identity politics as dilemmas full of tensions. Importantly, what I'm saying is nothing new, and Angela was one of the first Romani intersectional feminists talking about the very precarious position of Romani women within the Roma rights movement. Other scholars such as Alexandra Oprea or activists such as Ostalinda Maya have also spoken about this sort of fracture or rupture of the Romani rights movement. Some defenders of a traditional kind of conception of Romani ethnic identity, claim that this is diluting the overall agenda and the assumed homogeneity of Romani identity. Romani intersectional feminists were portrayed as non-Roma white Gajikane, saying, oh, you have become non-Roma, you are bringing these dangerous concepts. So it's already happened. And I think it's really interesting to observe how this kind of narrative has also been applied to queer Roma identity, which in my mind is a more recent manifestation of this identity dilemma. Can I just have a sense in terms of time, because I'm not measuring it? How are we doing?
Good. I think yeah, you have other like 3 minutes.
Okay.
But yeah, take your time, no worries.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as I said, I'm gonna show the video We Queer Roma Valencia after the discussion between Angela and myself. But I think Romani queer intersectional feminism is definitely an example of how decolonial critical race, intersectional feminist and queer theoretical perspectives can be and have been incorporated into the Romani movement or Roma rights movement. And also by the same token, into the feminist and LGBTIQ movements. I would say that's probably less than the extent to which LGBTIQ Roma have been actually included within the Romani rights movement. And it's something that also is discussed as part of We Queer Roma Valencia, this kind of liberal or this sort of shift towards a much more progressive and liberal thinking about among Roma. And I would say probably, to a much higher extent than among LGBTIQ non-Roma or feminists who still continue when we talk about mainstream LGBTIQ movement and feminist movements. These are, in my mind, are still very much resistant, although some elements of queer Romani intersectional scholarship have been incorporated. I've also included some visuals so that it's not just words and talking, so that you can also imagine real people behind all of this, whether it's the conferences which were public. These are public pictures. The conferences were also specifically the conference in Prague in 2015 and 2016, where I also conducted the fieldwork for my doctoral research, was accompanied each time by Prague Pride, and there was a specific float for LGBTIQ Roma as part of the parade, as part of the march. So you see how visible queer Roma have become, and also how proud, which is really beautiful to see, because it's something that, for instance, in the Czech Republic, the country where I originally come from, 10 years ago, this would have been unthinkable, 10, 15 years ago. I also just want to say very quickly, I've already touched upon some of the issues around the usefulness of queer theoretical concepts. So we see in the scholarship on sexuality and gender identity since the 1990s, that queer theoretical concepts have facilitated debates about the fluid, socially constructed nature of identities and identifications. This is particularly relevant to Romani studies, where traditionally, and this is something that Angela talks about in her article as well, this sort of like gypsylorist tradition of essentializing Roma is still very much present, and something that critical Romani studies as a discipline tries to challenge and say, listen, this we are living in the 21st century, and there are other ways of looking at identities and identifications. And in my mind, queer theoretical concepts are very useful in that sense. However, nothing is sort of peaches and cream, if you like. Obviously, there has also been critique of queer theoretical concepts, specifically in relation to the notion of destabilizing categories, and the fact that sometimes, queer theorizing has been capable of avoiding the analysis of asymmetrical power relations. So that's something important to bear in mind. By the same token, intersectionality, which I do use in my theorizing in conjunction with queer theoretical concepts, I use this combination or this joint reading of the two together, which I refer to as queer intersectionalities. So going back to intersectionality, absolutely essential to theorizing and analyzing asymmetrical power relations and issues such as anti-Gypsyism or racism more generally, homophobia, sexism, and other types of oppressions. At the same time, I think it's really important to be aware of some of the critiques of intersectionality. And for instance, famously, Jasbir Puar talks about the reinscription of norms, and specifically white norms and heteronormative norms in using intersectionality. I want to emphasize that I'm aware that's not something that Kimberlé Crenshaw had in mind. And she actually specifically says that this is not, intersectionality is not to be used as a theory of identity. It is to describe the very sort of intersection of different axes of inequality and oppression. So I think, that's why intersectionality is so key. I'm also including, I'm getting towards the end, I'm including some of the visual representations. So if you look at the one which is not the black and white, but the colorful one, that's a photo from the LGBT Roma float at Prague Pride in 2014. And again, as part of one of the research projects that I worked on as part of my second postdoc at the University of Portsmouth, we were looking at the sort of contrasts between, some stereotypical portrayals of Roma, which is in my mind, the famous Koudelka black and white photo from 1968. And then, looking at the actual reality of people in the 21st century, queer Roma in the 21st century. As part of that project called Visualizing the Lives of LGBTIQ Roma, we created a series of visual self-representations. And when I say we, I mean the project team, which included mainly queer Romani visual activists and artists, and some of them you can see in the photos. So kind of taking on the tropes, the visual tropes of, nomadism, the trailer, the so-called gypsy trailer where, Agar Joe's future is red, and juxtaposing it with the everyday lived experiences of queer Roma in, this was 2019. So looking at, also the kind of ordinary everyday couple, which, and so many couples that exist, in an ordinary way. And no one would notice that they're Roma and LGBTIQ, or Roma and trans, as portrayed in the photo in that living room on the sofa. So, like I said, queer intersectionalities, in my mind, are very useful. I believe they're a plausible answer to the question of whether it is possible to theorize Romani identities as non-essentialist, unstable, and fluid. And at the same time, it's important to bear in mind that Romani identities are lived experiences within and constructed through and impacted by the discursive practices of the social world's interlocking power relations and structural inequalities. Investigating categories of identification such as sexuality and gender identity helps us understand the complexity of the everyday lives of individuals who self-identify or are identified as LGBTIQ Roma without reifying ethnicity as an essentialized fixed group concept. Attending to the underlying power relations, social binaries, and cultural scripts of the majority societies in which LGBTIQ Roma live helps us to look beyond ethnicity at structural issues common to both Roma and non-Roma, such as homo, lesbo, transphobia, and misogyny, whilst acknowledging and being able to investigate these specific effects and that their intersections with anti-Gypsyism produce for queer Roma. So I have got to the end of my presentation. If you're interested, you can also check out this link on which you will find the project Visualizing the Lives of LGBTIQ Roma. Like I said, I've included some of the photos, and this is my final slide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for this very insightful and inspiring presentation. Our next speaker is Dr. Angela Coetzee, and Claire will introduce